effects that it is having, or the effects that technological change is having on how people live and how people work, where the future of jobs, what the future of jobs is going to be, what jobs people are going to be holding in the coming decades, and most importantly, what is that doing to our politics and our societies, and can entrepreneurship somehow overcome the hurdles that in the way of the economies of the future? And I'm going to go quickly around. Alan worked for many years in finance. He's worked on the board of Tata Sons, and he's very familiar with the startup world that he describes in his book. How long have you been in India now, Alan?
In India, well, in and around India for 35 years. I lived here for 15 years.
And Carlo lives near Madras now. And how long have you been around?
I've been here on and off 10 years, 7 of the last years, definitely most of the year I'm in Chennai.
And David, how long have you lived in India?
An enormous experience of maybe 24 hours.
Yes.
So I can speak from real experience here. Yeah.
Yes, so, and David, of course, is an economist and journalist on TV. You know, 24 hours is, trust me, as an economist and journalist, absolutely enough experience to be an expert. And finally, Rashmi, who's written a wonderful book about an organization that has changed a lot of people's lives in this country called Akshaya Patra, which is, among other things, responsible for a large proportion of the midday meals that children in schools have. And so there's a bunch of different approaches in their various books. David has talked about, David is from Ireland, and he's talked about how Ireland appears to be doing tremendously well in terms of growth, but it also has a lot of young people. And mysteriously, these young people don't seem to see their future in this country that is doing really well. They're emigrating, and this is not something that is easy to explain. And Carlo's book is actually a series of interviews, 3 of them. One, all 3 with very thoughtful people. One of them is Pankaj Mishra, who's from Allahabad and now lives in Mashobra and in England. And another is a Cambridge scholar, and a third is at Harvard, a literary theorist and critical theorist named Homi Bhabha. And he asks them the really deep questions about what does it mean to trust an elite? Is trust breaking down? How do we approach the changes in our world? Why is it that there are divides between countries that are growing right now? How do we deal with migration from one place to another? And these are sort of very deep questions, and you may not be satisfied with the answers that they're giving, but that's not the point. The point is to try and figure out how people are thinking about these questions. Now, since we have kind of a broad topic and it's sort of disparate, I thought we'd narrow it as we start this discussion by going around the 4 of you and asking each of you to sort of describe what you think work will look like 20 years from now. What will work look like? How will our lives have changed? How will our political orderings and our social lives have changed in order to match the change in our work lives?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I mean, I think we've witnessed in the last 30 years the most incredible revolution, which is the rise of China, and now, hopefully, the rise on China's coattails of India. And that's been the biggest economic phenomenon since the Industrial Revolution. However, what we're now beginning to see is a new revolution. You could call it the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is digitalization, which is going to have even more profound effects on everybody, West and East, rich and poor. It could have very negative impacts in terms of the decline of work, unemployment, and the sort of disenfranchisement that has led to Brexit and Trump and so on. But it also could be very liberating. In the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes wrote a book, which I'm sure David can talk more about, which basically suggested that work is over and we'll only be working 15 hours a week because the machines will take over. So Keynes viewed mechanization And industrialization is a very positive thing in terms of freeing people up from drudgery in order to focus on things that mattered to them. We probably are now rather more fearful. We're working harder than we've ever worked, probably most of us. And we're very fearful of losing jobs because of digitalization, robotization, automation, etc. McKinsey's done some work on the possible loss of jobs across the world from digitalization in the next decade and have come to a number of about 1 billion people. Up to 30% of all jobs could be impacted, they estimate. They won't be right, but it could be extremely profound. On the other hand, there will be huge gainers from digitalization and robotization and automation. And the effects will differ country by country, industry by industry, and job by job. So in many ways, India might be less affected by digitalization and robotization than the US, because India is at a different point with different price of people, different stage of development, and therefore fewer jobs. If you think about the impact of automated cars, autonomous vehicles, it could well have a much lesser impact on the million Ola drivers in India compared to the, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Uber drivers in the US. And the thing about India which gives me great hope as to why India is going to benefit from what's going to happen is entrepreneurship. I think because of India's innate entrepreneurship and the demographic profile of this country, India could well be one of the major beneficiaries of the digitalization revolution.
I think this works, right? So, well, the question is what jobs will be available, or what will be the job to have in 20 years' time. Normally, I would have said prostitution was a pretty safe bet. But unfortunately...
they have the robots for those as well now, right?
Unfortunately, sex robots have made great progress, so I think that looks like it's under threat as well. But actually not. I agree with Alan. I mean, I think this is the time where probably, especially if you're an entrepreneur, but also if you're working for a company, we are working the most in history. In ancient Rome, a slave worked 5 to 6 hours a day. In the Middle Ages, you had 150 days off for festivities. And nowadays, an entrepreneur who has his own business will work 13 to 14 hours a day. So we are not managing it right. A robot means slave, and it would be, in a way, a not inhuman concept of slavery, in the sense of having a machine that you build that doesn't, in theory, as far as we know, have a soul. Work for you so that you can indulge in what the ancient Romans called otium, which is going to the gym and hanging out in the spa and talking about philosophy and how to best organize your society. So we are aiming for that, but we're not achieving it. The jobs that, in the meanwhile, while we figure out how to get there, will be available, will be jobs like prostitution, but probably more acceptable socially, that require human interaction like psychoanalysis, social assistance, where it's still not possible to yet, but coming very soon, of course, to substitute with a machine, with the coldness of a machine. It may be that changes very, very, very fast because, but at the moment, the jobs that have a chance to survive in 20 years' time are the ones that you cannot substitute, like psychoanalysis, for example. And there will be probably more and more in need for those jobs because of how our society is changing in the interaction with technology.
Well, I really enjoyed Carlo's image there of the Romans and their idea of luxury and free time. Apart from that, going to the gym bit, I can take. You know, if you don't have any real physical exercise, I can take. It's funny, you know, this idea.
Massage.
Yeah, massages. Yeah, chats and all that. But I was just thinking, you know, if you think of this idea of what you'll do in 20 years' time, it reminded me of my mother. 30-odd years ago, sitting me down. My mother is a retired school teacher in Dublin. If you don't know this species, these are Irish mothers. They make Jewish mothers look unambitious. So their sense is, and you're the only boy, and you're the youngest. So a little redhead boy talks to his school teacher mother, and his mother says, and I say, what should I do? But rarely do you get the opportunity to ask the mother. You're told what you should do. And back then, in the 1980s in Ireland, when we were in secondary school, the only thing you could be was either a school teacher, like my mother, it's very important, or a good job in the bank, or the civil service, Okay, they're the three options, and there really didn't exist anything outside that. All the rest was business, and that's for other people, and not people who want to do their exams in school. And in a way, she was kind of right. In the 1980s, they were the only jobs, but very, very few people I know ever went into those positions, but more importantly, those positions are now not open. So when I talk to my own teenage children, which tends to be a sort of a patois due to their hip-hop affectation, that they actually think they are black rappers from New York and not white school kids from Dublin, but that's another thing. So when I understand them, and they say, Dad, what should I do for a crust? I always say, and I try to say, just be slightly unconventional right now when you're in school, because our schooling system, I'm sure the Indian system is very similar, is hyper-academic. Hyper-academic. I'll give you an example. My daughter who likes playing piano, not particularly well, but she likes it. And she was doing an exam on classical composers last week. And the question that was asked is a typical Irish question exam, is not did you like Mozart's this, that, and the other, but in what date did Mozart write blah, blah, blah? Who cares? But our system is still incredibly classical. It's training people to be civil servants. And at a time, the only thing that technology strikes me as guaranteeing is that the notion that you have a source of knowledge that you have learned, and that is in your head, and it's private, it's unique, and that is your value, is gone. So when you get dissemination of knowledge, what you have to say to the kids is think for yourself as much as you can, because our education system in the Western world, and I get the impression from what I see about Indian students who come to Ireland that you have an amplified version of this virus of hyperacademia, teaches the kids to conform. Teaches the kids that, for example, you remember when we were in school and there were guys in your class who used to do this, and you weren't allowed to copy people. That was the worst thing you could ever do, was copy in school. And we called it collaboration in real life. You know, think about it. So my idea is, having gone from the very cold fireplace talking to my mother who knew everything, obviously, to looking at my own children, is try and teach them to take the path of least convention all the time in every issue. And then you'll be prepared for whatever the hell comes up, because nobody knows what's going to come up.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, David. There's a very beautiful poem by Khalil Gibran on the subject of work, and it goes, you know, always we've been told that work is a curse and labor is misfortune, right? I mean, if I were to ask all of you in the audience, how many of you look forward to going back to work on Monday? How many of you would put up your hands? A very small number of people. So that's because, you know, he goes on to say that in his mind, work is love made visible. If you love the work you do, you don't feel it's work. But most of us have never found that thing that we really love to do, or the thing that we're really good at, the thing that's our natural strength and talent. So from class 6 or 7, we are trying to get into IIT, IIM, and so on and so forth, because that's what we've been told. That's where the career lies. But those jobs are going away. When I graduated from business school, being a trader, you know, on Wall Street or Dalal Street was a great profession, but today the artificial intelligence and algorithms have taken over, and they can trade much more efficiently than human beings. So I think we have to, each of us as individuals has to find that sweet spot within ourselves, that job, that career, that profession that really speaks to our heart and soul, because that's something that a computer can never take over. So we've got to look more inwards. So far we've been looking outside for signals on what we should do, because there's a lot of fear that what if I don't get a good job, I can't sustain myself, my family. So it's a fear-based motivation for working, whereas the future has to be work made out of passion, out of interest. And also, you know, that's where entrepreneurship comes in, because I think the future is being a problem solver. There are millions of problems in the world. There'll never be an end to them. If you can have a problem-solving mindset, anything you come across, you'll be able to, find a profession or career for yourself. People will be willing to pay you to do that. And all these rubbish jobs today, which we don't like to do anyways, we don't really like to work at a call center and answer, the phone 20 hours a day. That's something a robot can do better, so let the robots do it. And I don't think we should be threatened by that. We should go back to being human beings with mind and soul and not just a body sitting in that office chair, warming the chair, and getting a salary at the end of the month.
But, I think that the education system that we have imported and really tinkered around at the margin with for 100-odd years is a really serious problem, because what you see is the way in which children, you take kids at 5 or 6, you go into a classroom, if any of you have done this, you ask them a question, every single one of them will jump out of the seat to give you an answer, okay? They kind of back themselves. Children love that. And they're like, it's me, I swear to God, in Ireland, like little girls calling over little boys, because at 7 or 8, you have no inhibitions. But then I see the kids who come to university in Ireland when I get them when they're like maybe 20, and you throw out a question after, maybe it's my teaching, I'm not too sure, but after an hour of having to listen to me drone on, silence. Nobody wants to stick their hand up and back themselves and say, I have the answer, because they're all afraid of being wrong, because they've been educated in this notion of the single right answer. And we all know when we grow up, there's hundreds of answers to every question and hundreds of forms of intelligence. So I think if we were to go back and try and engineer this situation where people do what they love, we have to try and, at least in the education system between the age of 8 and 18, not corral them into this system where it breeds a fear of being curious.
I think that that's always been a problem here as well. When I was growing up, it was expected. I grew up, among other places, in a small steel town in what is now the state of Jharkhand, and it was automatically assumed that you would become either a doctor or an engineer, and that wasn't even decided in class 12. It was decided in class 8 on the basis of which courses you started taking then. And in class 11, I actually wanted to do the art stream, and immediately, my masculinity was questioned. It was the ladki log karte hain, right? And so dutifully, like a good boy, I went and I did maths, which meant that I had to become an engineer, right? There was no alternative. It was 45 people in class, 41 boys, and 45 people taking the IIT joint entrance exam, right? And going every weekend to Agarwal coaching. Now, the amazing thing about this is that now that most of us have grown up, the number of people who are engineers, 0. Not one engineer left, I think, in our class. There are a lot of people in some managerial positions, but not even that many. Most of us are doing things we would never have dreamed of doing when we didn't know existed when we were in school. And I think that goes to your point.
By the way, all the Indian doctors live in Dublin, by the way. They all came. Exactly. All your class moved over on the slide.
They're probably there.
About 10 years ago. I don't know what happened. Say what happened. All the Indian doctors.
The reason this really matters, this conversation about education, is not just what we do to our kids and their happiness and their creativity, but because the one thing that we need to survive in the new world of automation, digitalization, machines is innovation. And I'm afraid, and you guys are going to hate me for saying this, Indian business so far, has not demonstrated a consistent pattern of the ability to innovate in product, particularly, but to a certain degree also in process. So there's one thing we need to do in Indian business, whether it's small business or like me working for Tata, is have 1,000 times more innovation. And for that, education needs to change, but also the view of culture in businesses to allow people, as they were saying, to take risks, to make mistakes, to do things differently and not to conform.
This brings out all the point. I teach here in India, the Asian College of Journalism, and I try to teach critical thinking. And because of what you had described with your great experience, 24 hours here in India, Actually, I think on the, and what you have also underlined.
Carlo, I don't think that's working.
And what you have also underlined, which is that children should be encouraged to follow their inspiration, which is a dangerous field, of course, because they might follow their inspiration to enter into a job market that doesn't exist anymore. But I think there is a solution for all these questions, which is right now the trend is coding. So kids are going to programming. That will be like a box in which you can't escape from in a few years, because everybody will be into programming and machines will be programming themselves. They're already doing that. So that is why, for us writers, it's good, and for us who teach critical thinking, there is a job in 20 years, which is to promote liberal arts. And I'm not the only one saying this, because this is where the innovative thinking comes from, when thinking out of the box comes from reading novels, from thinking about not within a box of an engineering mindset, but from what Albert Einstein said, that it's in the irrational that you find the ideas, it's then in the rational that you prove your ideas, your theorems. So in order to promote innovation, you have to push people towards critical thinking. And I think this is happening now in India. It is and it's stimulating to be here, being part of that job.
So I'm going to come back to...
Can I back to that issue?
As Rashmi's the one who's been through the Indian education system, let's...
No, I think we have to also realize that work is a very big part of our identity today. I mean, if I don't have a visiting card to introduce myself, who am I? So
you start by asking someone, what do you do?
No.
Right? Hello, how are you? What do you do?
We never do that in Ireland because a lot of people don't do anything. So it's very rude.
So are we prepared for a future where if a lot of the drudgery work is taken over by machines and we actually have time to explore and do things which are not productive on a daily basis, weekly basis, they don't give us a visiting card, I'm freelance something or the other, or I have to invent my own, designation. I don't think the future is a future of very large corporations, and so it's going to be much smaller companies, individuals who are working at, smaller
I think a lot of what we assume about how work and lives will pan out in the future is probably based on a very specific view of the economy, which is that I am going to get a particular kind of job now, and then maybe I'll transfer to another company that does a similar thing, etc., 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 and I'll be doing that thing for the rest of my life. And we are definitely, our generation, forget about your generation, our generation has not been able to achieve that. All right, so it's already changed.
Except I think that view of life is a middle class point of view. For most Indians, they're entrepreneurs. I'm a farmer, I run a small business. I'm a trader, I run a small business. So what you're describing is a middle class view of the way that work happens.
Could I just come in here on the
In many ways, we're joining those agricultures.
We're all becoming...
it's always very interesting. People talk about innovation all the time, and India needs more innovation. In my profound experience of India, as you know, India needs less innovation, actually. So if you look at why, for example, the Brits got their act together and started to innovate profoundly in the late 18th century, in the early 19th century, in the cotton industry, it was because their wages in Britain were twice as high as wages in Holland. And consequently, British industrialists had to figure out productivity-enhancing methods to make it in any way feasible to make cotton in England, which they got from you guys, by the way, as you know.
By the way,
okay?
They were pillaging
That's
India.
what the English are like. We can whisper it together after the gig, okay? That's what they do. But the reason they innovated was because their wages were incredibly high and they had to substitute machines for people to remain productive. In India, you have the opposite problem. Your wages are very low because you have a massive population, and if you go for this drive of innovation, you will lead to widespread underemployment, number one, and unemployment. And the reason it's not going to happen is because business doesn't need it, because wages are still extremely low. And until such a time as wages are high, you will not see innovation in India like you see, for example, in Germany, because the Germans need to do this to remain, and that's what's going to happen, and it's going to take a long time.
See, now we have programs like, I'm talking about farm workers who are more than 50% of India's working class. I went to Assam this month, and the owner of a tea estate said, it's very difficult for me to find people who want to pick tea leaves today. I mean, 100 years ago, the British solved this problem by importing tribal women from Jharkhand. But now we have National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and you don't need to migrate from your hometown to work in a distant place. And maybe the children are more educated, they don't want to do this kind of job.
And it's a difficult, unpleasant job.
It's a difficult job. So maybe, it's going to be taken over eventually by machines which are more...
Well, I think, so, in case you think that we're a bunch of utopians sitting up here and we're talking about the distant future and there's no way that your job or the job that you want to do could possibly be taken over by a machine, there's a guy I know in Silicon Valley who was working on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And he said, robots are one thing, right? Robots will take away the jobs of people who have traditionally been insecure, blue-collar workers, right? And blue-collar workers in most parts of the world, including in India, have not really had as much of a say because of, the domination of the middle class in politics. The middle class has never been threatened by technical change. The middle class has always benefited from technological change. Now when you have artificial intelligence and machine learning, for the first time, the kind of jobs that most of us are trained for, these are the jobs under threat. The bank manager, the clerk, all right, sorry?
Doctor, accountant, lawyer.
Yeah, doctors, accountants, anesthesiologists are no longer being hired, all right? These jobs are already going away. And if you want, what my friend in Silicon Valley told me was, think of it the following way. Is there any part of your work day that you are bored by? That if there's any part of your work day that you do automatically, that you know how to do, without thinking hard about it, that part of your job is going. And it will go in the next 5 to 7 years. That a machine, a computer will be able to do it swifter and better than you. We have spent 20 years turning our working life, more than that in fact, turning our working lives into being, the perfect employee, but the perfect employee is, I follow these instructions, and I know exactly what the instructions are, I know what the precedents are, and I implement those accurately and just like anybody else in my position would. That part of the job, that is exactly what a machine can do better than you. So now think about your own job and figure how much of that am I bored by? And that's likely going.
But there, question.
There is another.
Yeah, Alan, on innovation, do you actually think? So, I mean, in India, what Alan was trying to say is that many of the things that we are very proud of, like for example, our great IT companies, Infosys, TCS, Wipro, they are not great IT companies. They've never invented anything. They've never developed it. I'm being hard, but they don't really develop much.
Global delivery model they invented.
Well, that's...
and then the Americans copied them. So they did have innovation, but a process, not
it was really not a process innovation. It was not, don't clap for that. It was not a process innovation because basically the global delivery model was guys being moved to a lower wage area. How is that an innovation?
Why do I think innovation is critical? And I disagree with an economist's view. I'm not an economist. I'm an historian sitting among economists. First of all, we're going to have 1 million people a month joining the workforce. Secondly, to make that challenge even harder, we're going to have robotization and automation. Thirdly, we're going to have global competition. Go into any bazaar in India and see where the product is made. Increasingly, it's made in China. Right? So we need to be able to compete against those international norms. And fourthly, because if you go out there, it's a mess, right? So when we deliver against the mess, it's through innovating. I'm looking at a sign, Omni-Leak's business, Chai Point, sitting here, fantastic business. He's used innovation to change such a basic thing as making tea. Being a tea walla, a chai walla in India, what more basic job is our Prime Minister can assure us than that? And yet, Omni-Leak has taken tea and innovated and is creating a fantastic business which is creating jobs. So for Indian businesses to survive in an interconnected, competitive world in which all those agriculturalists are going to come into the workforce, they're going to come off the land, and compete against the Chinese, and compete against machines, the only way we can do it is by doing things better and different, to create jobs and to create wealth because otherwise the mess of India is going to hold us back.
Will it genuinely create wealth for these million people, or will it go to the entrepreneur? Doesn't entrepreneurship on this scale mean that you take your business larger, you make your business ever larger, you have ever fewer employees, all right, and
Possibly,
therefore
except,
a greater and greater amount of how much I spend on tea goes to...
Right, so Ola employs 1 million drivers. Now those jobs and the equivalent in Flipkart or Chai Point, they may be relatively unattractive for the middle class like us, but they're real jobs which pay great wages for those people. Now who's going to win and lose? The middle is going to get squeezed. There probably will be more Chai Point jobs and there'll be more entrepreneurial jobs. It's the middle guys, the people who work with their brains and professions, they are going to be the people who need to innovate the way they...
No, I think it's fascinating to look, as we are looking into the distant future, but we maybe want, we might want to also look at what's happening right now in our relationship with technology, like what mistakes are we making now? In my opinion, one of the mistakes is data entry, for example. So we are informing this system, which is going to become artificial intelligence, which will rule our lives. That work is extremely underpaid right now. In the US, you get paid $10 to $14 an hour for data entry. That means you're not understanding what you're doing. You're paving the way for the transformation of your own reality and how you will lose your own job, and you're getting paid $10 an hour, which in the US is not very much. So there should be an international minimum wage for data entry, for example. Very few people talk about that because we're not aware of what's happening, but this is what's happening. We're having to map out the system which is going to take over our jobs, correct? And then there is this sort of neoliberal, a little bit, surrender to the idea that robots are coming and we can do nothing about it. Well, we can also capitalize it on the fact that robots are coming. We can, and we should, I think, have permits, job permits for robots. So before we go running into, oh, yes, they're taking over a job, 4 million truck drivers in the US will immediately lose their job as soon as we have automatic cars. Well, maybe they should have driver licenses robots that are extremely expensive and with which you can fund the pension funds of the people who will be displaced from their work for the rest of their lives. Okay, it's, again, a social democratic idea, but why not, right? I think you may argue that research and development will suffer from it, but that's been disproven many times, right? So you can start thinking in more creative ways about the great threat of robots to our jobs.
I agree with Carlo 100%. I mean, this idea that technology and, to a degree, Wall Street and Silicon Valley will hijack human resources, this thing in our heads, but more importantly, will funnel all the riches to a tiny, tiny percent of people who own these companies is ridiculous to imagine it will sustain because it's profoundly anti-democratic. And the great thing about democracy, it does work slowly, but eventually if you have the 1% garnering more and more and more of the resources of the world, the other 99% will say, hang on, this doesn't work for me. And one of the problems with robots and automation and gee whiz and the future and all that sort of malarkey is that I would say the biggest source of fake news in America is not the White House, but Silicon Valley. That Silicon Valley is promoting a casino for venture capitalists, of which maybe 1 or 2% of them will get out. And in order to promote that, they have to engender this notion that the world is changing so dramatically that if you're not on board, you're a loser. Or as the text people say, you don't get it. But we get lots of things. So I think we've got to be very critical in our faculties when looking at this utopian technology is changing everything and see, A, who's winning? Who benefits? Is it me? And if it's not me, who is it? And if it's not me and my friends and the people I see around me or my community or my country, well then, let's ask questions.
Rashmi, there's a sense in which we are worried currently that this increasing, the automation and AI will strip away our jobs, but the owners of those technologies are the ones who are going to benefit. Now, and is it possible somehow that a lot of what we are being told is developments, you know, people in Silicon Valley talk about universal basic income. We hear about philanthropy being conducted by Bill Gates and now, you know, by Steve Jobs' widow. And for example, Akshay Patra as well is, you know, a lot of it is from Mohandas Pai, who used to be at Infosys. Is there some way in which we should look at how the global elite is managing their position in this transition with a certain skepticism?
I don't have much interaction with global elites, so I don't want to comment on this topic. I think I want to make a much broader point that I think whatever we're talking about, the end of certain kind of jobs, automation, artificial intelligence, is going to impact men the most, okay? Because men derive most of their identity and their routine and their feeling of fulfillment from their jobs. You know, a guy has to get up in the morning, wear his shirt and have a place to go to work. And that's a model that will have to be relooked at. I think for a lot of women, even if they work, many of them feel their most fulfilling part of their existence is nurturing a family, and that's never going to go away. That can never be taken over by artificial intelligence. So I think men need to evolve a little bit. Society needs to evolve. We have to, maybe it's a golden opportunity to finally balance this whole gender equation. Why do women not want to work in the current environment? Why in every industry do we have very few women? Because the kind of time and emotional involvement required to be very successful at a career is a very high price to pay. So I think that's something we should look at too. I mean, the fact that
they're just cleverer than us. They've sorted this thing out. They've seen through it ages ago.
You know, in your book, there was, Alan, there was a section on how Indians are changing their mind about a great deal about a number of things, including, you know, is entrepreneurship more sensible? Should young people leaving college become go into the startup world rather than going into companies? Could you talk a little bit about how deep that changes, whether it is just limited to the elite or certain parts of the country? And
I think it's very profound. I think culture around entrepreneurship has changed dramatically and profoundly in the last 20, 30 years in India for the benefit of entrepreneurship. That young people in particular have taken on this excitement of the ability to design their own lives, create their own businesses, and do the things they enjoy. I don't think it may have started with the elite, with the IIT Wallahs and the guys coming back from Harvard and Stanford, but that virus is now spreading across the country. So in small town India, even in rural India, you get people, because of the internet, who have the same ambition to create their own business and to create their own lives and to make the country a better place, make the world a better place. I began by calling it the Americanization of the Indian mind, and my editor told me that that would cause offense, but I used it in a very positive sense. I think America is an amazing country. So the idea that the kind of positivism and ambition, which to me symbolizes America, has spread into India, that's a very good thing. And in many ways, I think the young people that I work in India are so much more American than they are European in their mindset. They're ambitious, they're positive, and they know that their lives are going to be better than their parents.
But you also say in your book, and this is why I thought of it when Rashmi was speaking, that by and large, the people whom you could, you know, the fields that you were looking at, they were limited maybe geographically to a certain degree. The fields that people were investing in were limited.
Yes.
It was massively male-dominated.
Correct.
And
so I think, I mean, as somebody said to me, we're at mile 5 of a marathon in entrepreneurship in India. Whether you look at VCs or entrepreneurs themselves, or the government's understanding of how to enable entrepreneurship, we're very, very early in the stage. And if you look at the US, obviously they're much more sophisticated and advanced. But China, I would urge anyone here who's a young person aspiring to be an entrepreneur, go to China. See what Chinese tech guys are doing, which is an order of magnitude, particularly in areas like AI and payment systems and so on, ahead of Bangalore. So go and see that opportunity of what's possible. That virus can then spread from the IIT Wallahs in Bangalore across India, because after all, the internet enables all of this.
Carlo, do you think that maybe it's a little optimistic to think that the internet will help somebody from, I mean, I happen to actually agree with Rosalind, but there are many people who would feel that, you know, somebody who's from a tier 3 town in North India is going to struggle to compete in terms of not ambition, but in terms of capacity to get things done in today's India.
Yes, I think that theoretically it's wonderful, and I think you can learn thanks to new technology, even if you are lost in a little village in northern India or in a village in northern Italy, where I come from. So the access to information is transformative, of course. The problem with the comparison with China is infrastructure, of course. I mean, the problem is here, you might then have a great business idea in that little village, but then how are you going to get it done if the infrastructure is in the conditions in which infrastructure is in India? So do you need to have a Xi Jinping to do that? I don't think so, but you have a long way to go to build that infrastructure, right?
No, I think internet and mobile penetration has just completely changed the game, and you know, there could be a person in Bastar who's doing a small business selling their goods online. Right. There are tribal women making laddus from mahua flowers, and there is a social worker who's helped them come together and they sell it online. So there are millions of such small businesses in this country which have benefited so much from Facebook. I mean, WhatsApp. There are people running. You know, these are self-employment.
Because what the internet has done is lowered the barrier to entry
so that's
for small businesses.
Thing, and I think Jio coming into entire country has taken video and audio penetration all over the country. So information is available. You could be a kid sitting somewhere in a remote area. You can access the same information and do the similar things. I mean, of course, coming to a bigger town gives you a bigger perspective, but you could do it sitting anywhere.
David, I want to throw this open to questions for a minute, so start thinking. Yeah.
It strikes me that there is no absence of an entrepreneurial spirit in this country at all. What you tend to see as Europeans going to poorer countries is that in poorer countries, the people are unbelievably entrepreneurial because they have to be. And so basically what you have, the whole process of becoming middle class, from what I can see, is a process of where you're trying to minimize risk to you. So you get into a position that has tenure, you join the government, you get into a guild like I'm a lawyer, I'll be protected. But the idea is to de-risk your life. That's how you equate status as bequeathed by our parents, okay? So when you go to poor countries, it is the very poor who are the most entrepreneurial. They're buying, they're selling, they're risking. If they don't make money, they don't eat. And the very rich were entrepreneurial, and then they become part of the cartel class because they buy monopolies once they get big. So my sense is that India has no need to become entrepreneurial. It already is in enormous cases. And it's just the Indian
it's the nature of entrepreneurship.
It's the clerical class, the middle class, who are a wee bit worried because the middle class are the ones who sat down with their mother and said, I'll become a doctor, I'll become a lawyer. And you're thinking, oh my God, technology is going to affect me. So I think that entrepreneurial it's here. It's
what
amazing.
Rashmi and I are talking about is a change in the nature of entrepreneurship, from the entrepreneurship of necessity, which you're talking about, to entrepreneurship of opportunity, because that's the people who are going to change this world.
That's where capital comes in. That's where the dissemination of capital
I mean, where I think I disagree with both you and Rashmi is that I think that when people in this country sort of march on the streets, that they've been doing increasingly when groups of them agitate for government reservations, for example, is they're not agitating for more risk in their lives. They're agitating for less risk in their lives. And the notion that everyone in a world of robots and AI will become a mini entrepreneur who will, be dealing on, with the vicissitudes of how the economy is doing, and shall I work today, shall I not work today, and make that decision. I think that's a very, very risky life. An Uber driver's life is actually quite risky. Yeah. And we're all going to be Uber drivers of one kind or another in the future. And I'm not sure that we're ready for that kind of risk.
And lots of people don't like it.
And lots of people just won't like it. And I'm not sure what our answer is for them for the future. And on that question of not knowing what the answer is, yes, questions opening. I'd like to start from the back because otherwise, is there anybody with a mic? Yeah. The gentleman in the patterned kurta or, yeah. No, oh, two patterned kurtas. The one for the back. The one for the
bearded one.
Hi, I'm an entrepreneur and data scientist also. So my first question to you is, if we see a time frame of 20 years, then we find that there are no jobs for like common people and all. And if we push the time frame to 40 years, then we find that there will be minimum wages for all, and there will be no money. There will be particularly some kind of common thing which will be going around for everything. So my question is, don't we see too early to it, and if we see too far to it, then it's going to be good?
Sorry, are we going too fast?
No.
What will happen in 40 years?
Oh, could you repeat the last part of the question?
No, I just wanted to ask, if you push the time...
Mic up, closer.
If we push the time frame to next 40 years, like we are talking about 20 years, job is going to be not there. After 40 years, is it going to be common for all? The minimum wage is going to be for everyone. I'm a data scientist, I work on it. I'm an AI expert, and I work for it. So I know that it's going to be hard for people. But in coming time, within 40 years, it's going to be very easy for all. Minimum wages will be there, and people will be living happily. Don't you think that will be okay?
Okay, so here's a question that I actually asked. Thanks for that question, because interestingly, it came up in a discussion I was having yesterday on this stage with Mohammed Yunus of Grameen Bank. And I asked him what he thought, and he's a big fan of entrepreneurship as well, because he believes that Grameen Bank is essentially an engine to create entrepreneurship. And so I asked him what he thought of the universal basic income. And he said it's a horrific and terrifying idea, and it'll make us all dependent, and we'll lose what makes us human. Does he have a point?
Well, this
is from Rashmi on this.
I agree. I think, as I said, work, if you work with love and, passion, it's something that defines your identity, your day. What would you do without work? What is leisure without work? If you have all leisure and only, fun to have.
This is exactly the mind frame that we have developed because of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, so
and
that's
you just said the
we
women
change our
luckily don't have
mindset
that
completely,
mentality.
but it'll be difficult. I mean, how successful have we been in changing our mindset for a host of other things? So I think it'll have to be a hybrid model. Maybe sometimes you have the technology, you can automate, but you choose not to. But that means we have to stop pursuing profit as the only motive. If the only concern is to, post a better result in the next quarter, then I have to keep doing things which will make me more productive.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
like Akshay Patra, they have a lot of automation and machines, but they still employ 6,000 people. So they have a chapati machine which can make 40,000 chapatis an hour, which was an innovation that they did. But they still employ in every kitchen about, 300 to 400 people. So that's a choice they've made. Maybe they could
Can we rely on capital to do that?
Yes, we can.
I find this answer really persuasive because this notion that what you do defines you and you should try to love it as much as possible, and work gives value to leisure. The feeling happy isn't like giggling away, it's like something done well that you've put time into. But this notion of, and I think one of the most dangerous notions in the world now is not the notion of the universal basic income, but the notion of shareholder value. And the notion that companies only have shareholders, and those shareholders every quarter terrorize the chief executive into generating what I would call spreadsheet economics, a number, and is genuflected to by CBN and the markets, etc. This is the process.
And any other form of behavior can be justified
is regarded as delinquent. And this is really worrying.
Alan, as a member of a board and therefore representative shareholders, are we being unfair on capital here?
Yes, we are. I think, to go to the core of the question asked to us, it seems to me that any time you have profound economic and social change, you have people who have fear about it. But the experience of history is that while there are losers and so on, in general, we tend to benefit. The two things we need to do is do things as work that we enjoy. That was Rashmi's point earlier on. But secondly, learn to relearn. We've got to learn to re-educate ourselves constantly during our careers because the wave of change is going to get much shorter. The speed of change much faster.
Okay, yes, questions. The girl in the 5th row with the striped t-shirt. That's you, yeah.
Good afternoon. The first industrial revolution sort of demarcated gender stereotypes in many ways as breadwinners and homemakers. The fourth industrial revolution, like you all spoke about, is a huge equalizer in many ways, with the roles being very fluid. Your work and your personal life is almost merging together. And the foremost requirement in any workforce will be talent. Do you think in that lens, a lot of the inequalities that today exist in terms of gender and also in terms of class, how certain people are privy to Ivy education and many people are not? So do you think that in many ways this kind of a change will be an equalizer in many spectrum, and how would it play it out?
It always happens.
Who wants to take that?
I think the future is female. No, really, I do. I think our time is gone. It's yours now.
I have a friend who says, you know, like maybe men will be obsolete in the future. But I don't know.
Look, I know a lot of men,
Yes, so we're
and
looking forward to it, actually.
I can assure you, whatever the technology is, they're going to try and find a way to like keep themselves in charge. All right? Did anyone read of the read about the Microsoft robot? So when Microsoft trained this AI, right, and said we're going to release you out into the wild, and you're going to develop a personality, and within like 7 hours it was racist, right? And the truth is that machines do not, you know, don't come out of nothing. They come out of who we are. It's the data entry guys that Carla was talking about who are putting all our experiences in. And they're going to wind up reflecting exactly what we're like.
There's an important detail about that data entry guy to answer to your question, because most of the time that data entry guy is male. So there is a debate about, no, but it's serious, because actually there is a debate about who is informing, putting into shape the algorithm. And if it's a male mind, then you will have a male framework for the algorithm.
Carlo, that's not right, because I
Well,
think
that's what
the lady
feminists
who asked
are
the question
arguing now,
is
so
exactly
I
right,
mean
in the
that.
sense that what's going to win in the future is the best talent, and the best talent working with the other best talent, and diversity of talent. So organizations that have people from every background, male and female, every social background, every nationality, are going to outperform the ones who are male and just Gujaratis all working together.
And I will also add that the definition of best in best talent will be decided by a man. So, okay, yes.
But, yeah.
The next question, please. Somebody, the gentleman in the striped shirt, yes, that's right.
Why don't just take 2 or 3 together? Just take 2 or 3 questions together.
Take 2 or 3 together.
Are we addressing a problem that has necessarily come out of the West without finding an Asian or an Indian solution for it in terms of what our current reality is and where we want to go, rather than once again fall victim to Western economic imperialism in that sense that they define the problem, they create the solutions, and we only simply sit here and follow it?
Right. We'll take a couple more. Good question, but we'll take a couple more. The guy waving his cap, because I'm afraid he'll lose it.
How do you think the schooling system could be changed to further help us to move past innovation?
Okay, great. Thanks. And a third, somebody further back. I see no hands in the last 4 rows. I will pay attention to you. Okay, actually nobody interested? Oh, there's a girl, the girl at the back. Yes, you turn around, stand up. Yeah. That's you. Her.
There's a Western wing here.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My question was education, finding your passion. They're all bottoms-up approaches. So for careers that depend on technical knowledge and data as much as they do for emotional intelligence, what top-down approaches would you suggest as tangible solutions to save your job?
Okay, who wants to take, is it a Western plot? Alan, as leading Western plotter?
We live in a single world. And one of the things that's happened with globalization and the internet is there is no West and East anymore. If you're running a business in India, you're competing against both the Chinese and the Americans. So I think this old idea that we can put up trade barriers and we can control our own destiny and somehow other people are doing things to us, I just don't understand it. So I'm afraid, sir, you lost me with the question. It's a question which might have been asked in Delhi, in the Delhi School of Economics 30 years ago, but isn't relevant to today's market.
I'll tell you exactly where it is still being asked. which is in the question of who owns the patents. Let us assume that machine learning will take over and artificial intelligence will rule in about 20, 25 years. Who owns the patents? There are 6 pools of capital, mostly in North America, China, and the Gulf, that own pretty much the majority of what is likely to make money in the future. Do we have any way of reclaiming this? I don't know.
I think the question is very, very valid. I mean, on Republic Day here in India, it's a very valid question. I was thinking of this in the tuk-tuk as I was coming, because I was asking the tuk-tuk driver what's going on. He says it's the Day of the Republic, the Constitution. And it is quite odd that India has a constitution which is a largely Western construct, because if you think of let's say you take Ireland as a republic too, broke away from the UK, broadly similar political background, tried to recreate a system which is clearly not British and is a genuflection to maybe France or America. So we come with this Republican constitution and we all buy into it, it makes kind of sense. But for us it makes sense because that constitution is coming from the Enlightenment, which is a rather Christian idea from Western Europe. And so the philosophical basis of our constitution makes coherent ethnic sense. You can
this is an entire other panel, David.
But you can argue that...
And you are completely wrong on every possible level. All right?
But you can, it is
starting with the idea that Ireland is part of Europe. Where did you get that one?
I'll give you a much lighter answer about the Indian. When I asked my father-in-law, who's Indian businessman in Tamil Nadu, about the robots coming and taking over, he says, machines are breaking down here in Tamil Nadu as it is. Imagine the robots. So like, they're not going to take over.
One last thing. I want to talk about education. So Rashmi and Alan on education.
I'll give a very quick prescription. I think students have to tinker around. Okay, you just have to explore a lot of different things. We actually have set up these tinkering labs, which is a good step. But you've got to make use of it. I mean, right now they're so overburdened with their regular syllabus exams. I don't know how many students have the time and space to just go and try new things when they're at that impressionable age. Yeah. And the second thing is you've got to, I think, fill your head with enough stories and inspiration at a younger age. We only read about historical figures who did things in the distant past. We don't read about people who can inspire us today. I don't know how many of you know that about Jaipur Foot. How many of you know about that? It's one of the most amazing innovations in the world of prosthetic replacement. I mean, for 3,500 rupees, a person can get a replacement foot, and it's developed right here. Why don't we have that being taught to students in 4th grade?
Thanks. Alan, can you finish it off for us?
Sure. I mean,
I think very briefly.
India is now Republic Day. India is 70 years old, so you can't carry on blaming us Brits forever. Right? So the biggest issue we need to face in India at the moment is the education system, just as the lady said. The education system is what the starting point of change needs to be. And we need a completely different and not inherited from the colonial era education system to deliver the kids to face the future, which is so exciting for this country.
Thank you all for coming. We've completely run out of time. We've gone over time, as you can tell from the fact that we're being practically thrown off stage. Thank you all for coming. We really enjoyed it.
I know all of you are with me, but before we come with the next session, a big round of applause for Alan Rosling, Carlo Pizzati, David McWilliam, Rashni Bansal, and for Mayur. Thank you for being here. And this session was presented by Dainik Bhaskar.
हर दिन आगे बढ़ने के लिए